It's a pleasure to be here, and I mean, I'll be sharing advice which will be probably different from the one you've already received from Aviv, Liz, and Josh. Hopefully, it might be complementary. I mean, it also tells you that since we're all telling you different stories, means that there's no ultimate truth or recipe that, okay, you should follow this path and then you will reach whatever thing. So just pick and mix whatever works for you. And also, to put a perspective, I need to tell a bit about my origin story. So 45, was born in Mexico City, did genetic tests, so I have Jewish, European, Native American, Chinese, Arab, North African, Western African genes. So let's say my both of my parents were born in Mexico City, but none of my grandparents were born in Mexico City, and just one, my grandmother was born in Mexico, another in Venezuela, two more in Ukraine. So, I mean, traveled around. My father studied nuclear physics in the 60s in Mexico. He was doing his PhD when he became politically involved and was political prisoner for 5 years. And in jail, he met my mom. I have an older brother, 3 years older, and I was very curious since I was young, and my parents kind of stimulated that. So, for example, when I was 6, I went to a program sponsored by the Mexican Academy of Sciences to teach kids how to code with Logo. And I mean, I want to say that when I was in high school, I was already kind of having a very strong inclination towards academia. So when I started my first bachelor's, I already had the intention of doing science. So I started going to conferences and writing papers as an undergrad. I did a summer at the Weizmann Institute while still an undergrad. There I met my wife Nadia. Back then there was still no Skype, so we had a long distance relationship. She's from St. Petersburg, and we got married in 2001. Went to England for a year for a master's, then to Brussels. Then she was studying art. She went to Granada, so I followed her. Then we went back to Brussels. Then after finishing my PhD in 2007, I was applying for different positions, including postdoc at SFI, but didn't even get the interview. Later I learned, because during my PhD, one of the things I worked was self-organizing traffic lights, and that was very interesting, but then my proposal for the postdoc was something completely different. And the people who reviewed my case liked what I had done before, but not the new proposal, so it was too early for those ideas. And anyway, I did a postdoc at the New England Complex Systems Institute in Boston. And then halfway my postdoc, there was this announcement of a research professor position back in Mexico at UNAM. And I was like, should I apply or not? Maybe not, because usually when there's a call, there's already a candidate, and they just do it to formalize that supposedly it's an open process, but they already have somebody for that position. But anyway, listened to my wife, applied, got the position, we moved to Mexico. And there in UNAM, it's a huge privilege position, because you get to teach like 48 hours a year. You get students with scholarship, postdocs with scholarship. I mean, I've had like 12 postdocs, but only had to pay one of them. There are internal grants that have very high acceptance rate, so you don't really have to worry too much about, let's say, some of the other ifs that in many other institutions you have to find your own money and students and so on. So it was great. I did a first sabbatical at MIT and Northeastern, and my second sabbatical here at SFI. But I mean, we decided to start exploring for opportunities abroad, because the situation in Mexico is not improving, and we believe our daughters will have better chances here than in Mexico. Not that there aren't any problems here, but hopefully there will be less than the situation there. And I mean, stating the obvious, probably many of the things that I will say don't apply to you because, let's say, we come from different backgrounds, and also I'm biased because of all my background. So I have to speak from my experience. I cannot do otherwise. But well, hopefully you will be able to extrapolate and take what feels good and makes sense for you. Then you can test it, and if it works, then you can decide whether you will apply it or not. And also try to learn from many more people and see what has worked for them. Try those things and then decide. So yeah, I mean, there's no definitive guide on how to be a scientist or a researcher. And one of the things that's influenced me is that my parents divorced when I was 10. My brother was 13. He coped with drugs, and I coped with swimming. And while swimming, from one of my coaches, he was telling me, well, there will always be someone better than you. And he knew because he had been like national record holder, competed internationally. I can't remember if he also won Central American championships. But you are good at some time, and then somebody else is better than you. So I learned through swimming that the race is not really against others, but it's against yourself. Also because everybody has different abilities, like these guys. So if you have some advantage and you don't exploit that advantage, then people will simply pass you. But if you have, let's say, a much longer path to go, it doesn't really matter whether you don't reach the level of others that had already a great advantage, but just whether you advance or whether you developed compared to where you were. So at the end, just try to do your best. Not, I mean, it doesn't help trying to make others do worse, so that relatively you are better than them. And yeah, so many of the things I'll say, I'll quote a Mexican politician. She said, well, I don't have any data, but I don't have any doubts. So also take it with a grain of salt. But well, one of these things that I do have data is that we will all die. So I remember in one of my first conferences as an undergrad, there was this talk by Seth Lloyd, and the title was something like Death, Taxes, and the Second Law of Thermodynamics. And I mean, sometimes we worry about very tiny things or present things, but everything is changing, and those things that seem very important for us will no longer be important, especially when we're dead. And also because everything is changing, we have expectations, but those expectations will be crushed for sure. So the question is not whether you will, let's say, reach something that you plan or not, but what will you do when difficult things happen? And also what is important for you and what should you strive for? And also, I mean, the carpe diem means seize the day or seize the moment, because every situation is unique. Today will not be repeated. So what can we do with these situations? And of course, this shouldn't be taken in a negative sense, in the sense that, well, if death is inevitable, why should I make any effort? Because, I mean, each one of you is unique, and because of that, you are the best at being you. And doesn't mean that you shouldn't try to improve or that you cannot improve. You always can do it. It's just that you will never be like someone else. So trying to be like someone else can be helpful. It's useful to be inspired. It's useful to imitate what works in others. But there's no optimum, and then there's no recipe for reaching that. So just focus on being yourself and the best possible you that you can be. And for that, you have to define what you want. But that's actually part of the life process, because it's not like, okay, now I know what I want and then I just do it. Life is a constant search for finding what you want, and this is also changing. And for many of you will be traditional academia, and for others it might not be traditional academia, and it's not that one is better than other, it's just what fits one person probably will not be the best for other people. So if you see somebody, oh, they did this and then I would have liked to do that, it might be that it was never for you. So the comparisons can be useful, but it's much more useful to focus on your own path, and to compare against yourself, not against others. And also, from what I've heard from some of you, you are at a relatively uncertain stage of your careers, but at the end, uncertainty will never fade away, even if you have tenure. There's this myth that after tenure, stress is reduced. That doesn't happen because stress is self-imposed. So if you kind of worry too much about whatever, doesn't matter whether you have tenure or not, you will keep on being stressed. And if you can relax with or without tenure, then it doesn't really matter. And I mean, you can consider yourselves already part of academic elite in the sense that you already finished your PhDs, you have prestigious postdoc positions, so you already have much higher chances than most postdocs to get a tenure track position. But maybe that's not what you will eventually want, and the only way of finding out is trying out. And I mean, as I see things, all of you could get a tenure track job, but maybe it's not the tenure track job that you want. In the sense that there are enough academic institutions in the United States and abroad that you would for sure find several that would make you an offer, but maybe you have like a very specific, no, I want to go into the University of Dockland in the ribbons department, and I will not be satisfied with anything else, but probably that department just hire 3 new people, and then the other departments will not allow them to hire until they get new positions, and then that will not happen until you are too old to be hired. So of course that doesn't depend on you, and also there are many constraints that people might have in the sense that what one of my colleagues calls the two-body problem. If your partner has some constraints in the sense that they already have a job or a business in a city, then that constrains where you can search for a position if you want to stay together, of course. And if the institutions that would be compatible with your personal preferences, personal life, are limited, then maybe, let's say it's not that you wouldn't be able to find a position, it's just that the constraints that you have are not compatible with the options. But I mean, at the end, everything you do, say, and think can be meaningful because it has consequences. So either positive or negative. And because of that, the idea is that, I mean, what I'm trying to say is that that can be enough motivation so that you try to do the best you can, whatever you can. And it doesn't really matter whether it's compared to others, but to what you could have done or not. But I'll speak a bit more about motivations later. So it's, I mean, we all have different goals, and these goals can be different scales. So a short-term goal can just making it through this talk without dozing off. And a long-term goal could be improving the chances of survival of our species. And in the sense that it could be something that probably we will not see it during our lifetimes. And I mean, anyway, we can have goals, and these goals move constantly in the sense that, okay, first I want to have this SAT score, and then I want to go to be admitted into this school, and then I want to get to this graduate school, and then I want to get this postdoc, and then I want to get this position, and then I want to get tenure, and then I want to get this and that and that and that. But if you focus on that, it's very easy not to enjoy the process, in the sense that there will always be something else to strive for, and it will never be enough, in the sense that it's much easier to set a goal than actually to reach it. So I'm not saying that goals are not important, but it would be rather an advice to focus more on the means rather than at the ends, to focus more on the now rather on the future or on the past, because otherwise we will live in permanent stress, especially because we cannot change the past, and most of the future we cannot control. But in the here and now, we can choose how to be. And it surprises me because I've met a few Nobel Prize winners, and some of them, they're still in a rat race, in the sense that they are still stressed, and it's like, come on, you already, what else do you want? But then realizing that there are people that already, let's say, have all the accomplishments in academia and still they're not satisfied, makes me think that if you are goal-driven, then even after you reach those goals, you will not be satisfied. So it's a matter more of enjoying the process, and of course the outcome of the process is important, but if you were able to enjoy the whole process, even if the goal is not reached or the result is not the one you expected, you already had a great time on the way. And this analogous with this distinction between fine art or infinite games, in the sense that a finite game has well-described rules, and for example, chess or Go, there are two players, and there are defined set of moves, and then a criterion that decides who wins. And then it's easy to set goals in these finite games because it's like, okay, I want to win, and then you decide on strategy. But then we also face infinite games, and there the goal is not so much to reach a state, but rather just to keep on playing. And in many cases, we play infinite games with finite strategies, in the sense that, well, this might be more evident like in companies that try to maximize their profits the next quarter, but then they kind of make bad choices that put at risk the company in the long run. But also, for example, for relationships, it's not that, oh, I want to win this argument, but if you want to stay in a relationship, then it's more like, okay, what would be the strategy so that, let's say, we can, let's say, reduce the conflict in the long term. And of course, probably many of you have different stress coping mechanisms or how to manage stress, but it's better not to have stress to start with. Yeah, in my case, I practice Buddhist meditation, and that helps me a lot, but there are also many other practices that can be useful. So tendencies tend to change, so what can we do? Of course, we can to adapt, but also now I'll use a shameless plug for my book, because the idea is that, okay, tendencies tend to change, but they change towards balance, in the sense that extremes are not sustainable by definition, so we can try also to tend towards a certain balance. And many people speak about personal, professional balance, but I think that it's difficult to distinguish between the personal and the professional, in the sense that you have to work on both. If you are not good at the personal, you won't be good at the professional, and vice versa. So you could say that they're not separable or entangled, and it's not that we should try to disentangle, but to thrive within that entanglement. Nevertheless, it's useful to have certain distinctions, and also independently on the aspects, we need to strive for another balance, which is between quality and quantity, in the sense that we might have a goal, okay, I want to spend a certain amount of hours a week with my kids, but then if I'm just, I don't know, with my phone or arguing, or let's say we're not enjoying, doesn't matter how many hours we spend, it's not enjoyable. So it's preferable to spend less time, but to make it quality time. And the same for research. I mean, if we work, I don't know, 60, 80 hours a week, but the productivity is very low, then it's better to work less time, but to make it more productive. Because anyway, we will never have enough time. There's always more things we want to do than the ones we actually have time to. So we always have to prioritize. And it's important to distinguish the urgent from the important, in the sense that urgent is something that you have to do really fast, but then important is something that you really want to get done. And in many cases, the important things are not urgent, so we just procrastinate and we don't even, we never do them. So Josh was mentioning that every yes is a no. So it is also advisable to decline many of the offers you'll get, but also don't go to the utilitarian extreme that, okay, will this help my tenure? Or, and if it doesn't, then because also from the stories we've heard, in many cases, when one does things that initially are not evidently beneficial for, let's say, your CV, they will be useful in many other ways, and you'll never know for sure. So, I mean, just better guide yourselves on what would you like to do rather than what will get me tenure. So, I want to speak a bit about time and how to divide it, or I mean, doesn't mean that you need to schedule, okay, I need 37 minutes a day of individual time, and then if I short of that every day, I'll stress about it. Just to have it in mind, try to have some space for each of these, and not to have one of these aspects dominate too much. And of course, this is dynamic because then there's a deadline, and then you have to dedicate more than what you would like. So, I mean, all of these would be different aspects of personal time, and hobbies are important because they will be helpful to motivate you to do your work. And I'll speak more about motivation later. And hobbies can be individual or related with family, friends, and so on. And by routines, I mean, actually, that's most of our time, like sleeping and eating and things like that. And in many cases, we can combine these, like, for example, when I'm doing house chores, I'm listening audiobooks that I find interesting, and they might or might not be academic. So it's kind of trying to do more than one thing at the same time. And then for professional time, we need time to procrastinate. That's very important. I have it in my calendar. I'm sure I'm missing some other aspects, but I mean, procrastination is usually seen as something negative, but there's this concept of wu wei, which can be translated as masterful inactivity. So in many cases, there's a situation, and the best option is not to do anything, and then the situation will resolve by itself. So if you kind of don't rush and try to do something about it, then let's say, for example, somebody will ask you, oh, please review this paper. And then you rush and review it. But then you wait, actually don't reply the email in the weekend, wait until Monday. And then on Monday, oh, we don't need that review. Somebody else already accepted to review it. And it's like, okay. Yeah. And And also, we need to rest in order to be productive. Creativity needs distractions. So, I mean, one cannot be creative just sitting in front of the computer and working. So, in many cases, going for a hike can be more creative than being in the lab. So, emails can take lots of your time. So, sometimes it's useful just to have a schedule for your email and not to check your email outside that time. And I'll expand on the other times. So for research, I mean, there are many different aspects of teaching. So for example, one advice that is common is to save some time per day on writing. So for example, when I was here writing the book, I had like 1 hour every day, usually the first time in the day before checking email, before doing anything, to write. And then you can start with all the emails and meetings and students and so on. Because if you leave those important things until you don't have any urgent thing to attend, you will never get to do it. And another valuable thing about research is serendipity. So for example, when I was first working on self-organizing traffic lights during my PhD in Brussels, I gave a presentation at the AI lab there, and one of my fellow PhD students there, he asked a question like, "Oh, have you tried X? Have you tried this and that?" And I said, "Oh, do you mean X?" And he said, "No, I mean Y." I said, "Oh no, Y is a very bad idea. But X, which is what I misunderstood you were suggesting, that sounds very good. Let me try that." And that really worked. And it's like, where does that idea come from? From my misunderstanding of his suggestion. So yeah, many things are unplanned. And just another comment, probably you know about the chaperone effect in publishing. So it is known that for publishing in high impact journals, like if you send a cold submission, it has very high probability of being rejected, because most people publishing in high impact journals have already published in high impact journals. So how to get in high impact journals? Well, you publish with somebody who already published there. So that's the chaperone. And once you publish there, then you can publish on your own in high impact journals. So yeah, one of the many benefits of social network. So while teaching, there are many things that you can have to consider. I mean, they can tell you, okay, you will teach this amount of hours per semester, but then especially the first time, you need to prepare a course, so it takes a long time. But then you can take advantage of what you're working on. So, for example, Wittgenstein, when he was in Cambridge, or Shannon at MIT, they would just give lectures on whatever they worked the previous week. And actually, Shannon, most of his work of that period, he never published. So we just have it because some of the students were taking notes, and then they organized some lecture notes, because he would just go to the blackboard. Oh yeah, I've been thinking about this and that and that and that and that, and it was like the edge of science at the time. And but I mean, to decrease the burden of teaching, of course, it depends on what are you teaching, because sometimes they will say, okay, you need to teach this course, and then you need to, let's say, you cannot deviate from the study program too much, but then you can make it interesting by introducing some of the things that you are working on, or also to involve whatever the students are interested in, make it more lively. And one advice, well, it's not advice, but let's say something that that I learned from my first sabbatical from Laszlo Barabasi's lab. So he has way too many PhD students, so he wouldn't be able to have 1 hour weekly meetings with each of them. So, and actually because he used to be 3 weeks in Budapest, 3 weeks in Boston. So when he would arrive in Boston, like at the beginning of the 3-week period, he would have a 2-hour meeting with a group. So he had like 3 different research groups with senior postdocs and junior postdocs and PhD students, about 10 people in each group. And it would be a 2-hour meeting with each of those 3 groups. And then everybody would present what they've been working on in the previous 3 weeks. And then they would get feedback, not only from him, but from the other members of the group. And then at the end of his 3-week period, he would have another 2-hour meeting to see, okay, what have you been working on for these 3 weeks? And I mean, maybe it's not optimal, but it worked, and I adopted some of that in the sense that with some of my students, we have a meeting every other week, and then everybody presents what they have advanced. So I do meet one-on-one for specific things, or if we are working on a paper or things like that. But let's say I see some colleagues that spend a lot of time advising one-on-one PhD students, and this practice of meeting with your PhD students all together, it's not only saves you time, but it's also useful because the students know what everybody's working, and then they can also give feedback among each others, which is also useful. So try to avoid administration, especially until you get tenure. And yeah, as I was saying, there's no recipe on what would be the best. I mean, I can tell you what would be a usual day in my life before the pandemic, because it has been chaos since then. But very probably it will be different for you. But continuing about administration and organizations. So this is a quote from José Ortega Gasset about 100 years ago. He wrote, "All public employees should be demoted 1 level because they have been promoted until becoming incompetent." So this in the 60s was rediscovered as Peter's principle. And of course, this never happens because of non-equilibrium, just like markets never clearing. But I mean, it's just a way of saying that bureaucracies are incompetent, so you will be dealing constantly with incompetence at all levels. And of course, we can kind of suffer or just accept it and go through it. And I mean, we are also incompetent in a way, so or in many ways. So the question is not whether somebody is incompetent or not, but how do we deal with our own incompetence? So dealing with our incompetence, of course, we can try to ignore or hide our mistakes, or we can try to learn from them. And this reminds me of Hanlon's razor that says never attribute malice to that which can be explained by stupidity. Okay, so about motivation, what can make us tick or give us desire to get out of bed every day? Again, everybody's different. So for example, Tesla had an older brother that it was the favorite of his parents, and then he died young, falling from a horse. So his parents never stopped grieving for him. So one could interpret that all the efforts of Tesla working until he would collapse were like to prove his parents that he was worthy of their love as well. Leonardo da Vinci also was an illegitimate child, and one could interpret that he was also working a lot to gain some legitimacy in his parents' eyes. And I mean, it might be useful to understand or to develop a narrative on what are your motivations. I mean, what are you trying to prove to whom? I mean, it can be to yourself. And I mean, most motivations are valid. Whatever works, as long as it doesn't hurt others, uh, it's useful. But I mean, the fact that you are here means that you have several motivations. No? Otherwise, you wouldn't have sustained so many years during a PhD without any reward. But it's useful to see what motivates you, because these motivations can also change. And also, motivation is stronger if it's for more people. So they did this experiment some time ago about people trying to quit smoking. And to some group, they told, okay, if you don't smoke for the next month, we'll give you $100. And then another group, okay, if you don't smoke in the next month, we'll give $100 to your friends. And the second group had a slightly better success rate of quitting smoking. So it's not so much like, oh, I really need to make an effort not to disappoint others, and that will motivate you more. But it makes sense that if what you are working will not be simply, oh, I'm curious about this thing, and then if I find the answer to this solution, I'll be happy, which I mean, can be valid, but it might not be as motivating as, oh, there's this situation and this amount of people are affected by it, and then if I find a solution, then their lives will change. But that usually is more motivating. And well, festina lente is Latin for make haste slowly, but it's a phrase from ancient Greece, something like spaude bradeus or something like that. But it's basically, in many cases, if we try to do too much, then we'll end up getting less. And I want to speak about stress in the sense that if we are overstressed, then we will be less productive than if we aren't overstressed. So we need to rest, especially for creative tasks. But of course, if we relax too much, then we won't be as productive as we could be. So that's another chapter in my book. So if you want to know about it, buy my book. But yes, it's just to say that sometimes stress is demonized, like stress is bad. But in a way, if it can motivate you or let's say push you to do things that you wouldn't do otherwise, you can say it's positive. But of course, if on the long run it burns you out, then it wasn't so good. And it's difficult to measure a priori because, first of all, everyone is different in the sense that they can handle more or less stress, and also these changes in time. So at some points, a bit more stress might be beneficial, but then at other points you will need less stress, and then you will be more productive. Anybody has felt this? At least once? Yeah. Yeah, so if somebody says that they are always right, I would be extremely suspicious. So it's normal that we have limits, and we are taught to be skeptical, so it's natural to be skeptical about oneself. So a bit of self-check is like, okay, what I'm saying, is it really making sense, or I'm just fooling myself and everybody else? That is healthy, but again, it's a bit about balance. If we do it too much, then we will be questioning everything and won't be able to get anything done. And there are some studies with CEOs, and it seems that men tend to exaggerate much more, in the sense that they will be questioning themselves much less. So they will make bolder claims, and there's evolutionary explanation. Again, no data, just no doubts. In the sense that males are always showing off. But I mean, it's one of these things that we can just accept it and carry on, in the sense that you are what you are, and if people don't approve or dislike it, it's more their problem than yours. Of course, take the useful criticisms, but ignore the nastiness. So, for example, my master's in Sussex, I got a good training on British empiricism, so question everything. But then I got professional deformation, in the sense that I started questioning everything, not only in academic life, but also in my personal life. So my wife would say, "Oh, why don't you go and buy this?" And I'm like, "But why do we need to do that?" So, no, bad idea. Don't do that. So, yeah, I mean, just want to say that in many cases we can question too many things that don't really need to be questioned. So it might be difficult in some situations, but I mean, yeah, I think if you already have a PhD, then that already shows that you know what you're speaking about. And even if it turns out that you were mistaken, that's how science works. And I mean, this is not advice that I would like to give or you would like to get, but that's the way the world rules, the world works, in the sense that before even think about changing the rules, you have to play by them, in the sense that you say, "Oh yeah, I don't like the tenure process." Like, well, yeah, we very few people do, but and it also depends which rules. But I think that one way of coping with it is not to focus so much on metrics, like, okay, I need to publish this amount of papers, get this amount of money in grants by this time, and otherwise it will be bad. I think that if you just focus on what you are passionate about, then all the metrics will follow, because it's much easier just to work on the ideas that you're having, and then the papers will come out. Doesn't really matter whether it will be 2 or 5 or just 1, because again, it's about the difference between quality and quantity. So if you just tick the boxes of quality, what for to have tenure and be miserable at the same time? And well, there's of course certain etiquette in academia. So question is, okay, how should one behave at a conference or a meeting or a seminar, at a research visit? And yeah, I will have time to expand too much on this. In the sense that in these social situations, it's useful that you make connections, but of course it's difficult for people who are shy. And then it might be too tempting for extroverts to show off, and then that's also not positive, because then people will say, "Oh, that person is a show off," and then they don't like them. And I know a few people that have very good ideas, but they're jerks. So, or let's say they have difficult personalities. So people don't accept their scientific ideas, not because of their ideas, but because of their personalities. So, of course, that is unfortunate. But I guess just being kind works. just be yourself. Uh, and I mean, there will be always somebody who will not like you, so you cannot satisfy everybody. And especially if you are successful, there will be envy, and it's just the way it is. So no, no need to try to please everybody. Um, also, don't be a snob, like using quotes in Latin. French is okay. So about tenure, I mean, you can read many stories about this, and perhaps it's less stressful if you don't see it as a goal, but as a path. So see it more like an infinite game in terms of a process rather than a finite game, meaning a goal. And again, it's not something for everybody in the sense that, I mean, John was saying like, okay, if you want to get tenure, then you need to do this and that and that and that. And for some people say, well, I would like to get that, but I'm not ready to put up with all those conditions to get it. And also, some people do get it and then they give it up. So it's not something that is essential, of course. Others will be like, oh yeah, tenure is the only thing that matters in my life. But I mean, some countries don't even have tenure, like in the UK. And since there's more and more production of PhD students, the competition is higher and higher. I mean, in different countries, this varies, but there's lots of competition everywhere, but it's not the same. So there's this recent study by Dan Larimore and colleagues about where universities hire their new faculty, and it's usually the top-ranked universities hire from top-ranked universities, and the lower-ranked universities also from top-ranked universities and from lower, but it's always like going down. So, of course, there are exceptions. So you can always easily find tenure in universities with lower rankings than from the university that you graduate. But I mean, there are many stories I know. So, for example, two of my friends, they were at MIT and they didn't get tenure, not because they did not deserve it. Well, of course, there's the conspiracy theory that it's because they were Latin, but perhaps it's simply that MIT and other institutions, they have the luxury of getting the best candidates every time they launch a call. Then they will get highly motivated and stressed young people with lots of talent, and then they will break their backs for 7 years, and then with the promise of maybe tenure. But then it's like, okay, should we give them tenure, or should we get another young, bright person that will break their backs for 7 years? Let's better do that. And let's say it seems that's a common practice in many universities. And of course, they've found tenure positions in other universities, so it's not the end of the world. And some people do get tenure, but it doesn't really matter how much you stress on the way or not, so better not to get stressed. And also, if you go to the private sector, there's this study that, I mean, some people, they want to stay in academia, but then they do one postdoc, and then they don't find a position that satisfies them, and then they do another postdoc, and then they don't find another position, and they do a third postdoc, and each time it's harder and harder because, like, okay, after 3 postdocs, if you haven't found a position, then maybe, and many postdoc positions have a limit of how many years you can apply after you finish your PhD. So some of them will go either to a more teaching, less research position, or they will go into the private sector. But there was this study that noticed that people that go into the private sector right after their PhD, then they start kind of climbing the professional ladder, And if you do a postdoc and then go into the private sector, then you will start at the same place that the freshly PhD graduates enter the private sector, only that with several years later. I mean, you will get promotions and climb the academic ladder, but in the private sector, they don't really care about postdocs. So, I mean, it doesn't mean that if you are interested in going into the private sector and already did 1 or 2 postdocs, then you threw away some years of your life. Of course, that experience can be useful. But it's just what this study found. And more, there are other positions for people who know how to do research in government and NGOs. And I mean, you can always change career path, but there's nothing wrong with having a vision and following. Okay, so summarizing all the unsolicited advice I gave you, considering that it's contextual and biased and probably will not apply to in many situations how to name them. Well, so it's just we will all die, focus on processes rather than goals. We're all interrelated, so whatever you do will have an effect. Changing is constant, so better accept it and adapt. You cannot really distinguish between the personal and the professional. We will all make mistakes, so better to learn from them rather than ignore them. Yeah, I mean, the question is not whether we will make mistakes or not, but how much can we learn from our mistakes. It's very important to find motivations, and probably these motivations will change. So even if you have one motivation now, doesn't mean that will take you, that it will still be your motivation in a few years. Slower is faster. Fake it until you make it. This is the advice for imposter syndrome, that if you feel that you shouldn't belong or that you are not worth of what you're doing or that you might be mistaken, just fake it until, let's say, assume that you know what you're speaking about. Speak as if you have full confidence, and that's it. And yeah, just play the game. So if there's only one takeaway from this, I would say don't make too much fuss about everything. Probably it won't help, and probably will make things worse. Most things are beyond our control. Just enjoy the ride, and rather than stress about what could have been. I mean, we can stress about anything or about nothing, but what's the right balance of stress? It's something that we are constantly exploring. And I mean, we're all still learning, trying to figure out, and anyway, we'll die very soon. Okay, so questions?
We can probably take about 3 questions, and then I'll have a few announcements, and you guys can have lunch.
How has your motivation changed or not changed?
Yeah, I think that I have several motivations, and some of them have changed and some of them haven't. So for example, like individual selfish motivation is that I like asking questions. So that's like the dream job is to do science. So that hasn't changed. But then I've had other motivations like, oh, I would like to improve urban mobility in Mexico City. And we've had some projects that got implemented, like to improve the movement of passengers in the metros. So that has helped millions of passengers every day. But then it's very hard to get things done. I mean, for me, the politics is much harder than the science. So trying to convince politicians to get things done. I mean, yeah, I could say it has been frustrating. So let's say that has decreased my motivation, not because I wouldn't like to improve mobility in cities, but because I haven't found a way of doing it because of, let's say, more political obstacles rather than technical obstacles. So let's say I tried different ways and didn't find a solution. So then I kind of have focused on other types of problems. And now I will start dealing with healthcare, and then I will see what insurance companies and hospitals and politicians will bring. So that's another thing, and I think Aviv has followed that path. That simply, if you change your research question, then that kind of gives you some freshness and motivation, because simply it's something new. But again, it's not for everybody, and I know people who have dedicated their whole lives to a single question, and that can be great as well. Yep.
I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about planning, because you've made several moves.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the reasons for all of them have been, but surely there's been some like range of, you've moved sometimes for some reasons and other times for other reasons. You gave us a reason that you moved away from Mexico City, and that has to do with your children, but you can't just decide to move.
Yeah.
You have to still do some career planning that aligns with some goals. So I'd love to just have you talked about maybe how that's worked for you and how you've explored opportunities and made things
So
have a process?
So in my case, I had lots of flexibility because Nadia was not, let's say, was supportive of moving, because let's say my partner would say, I don't care, I will live in this city, and if you want to go, you can go. Then probably I would stay wherever city we would be. So that's a big difference. And then in many cases, of course, like choosing the next place to go, it's not only like, oh yeah, I would like to be in this institution, but okay, would we like to live in that country? Would we like to live in that city? But let's say there were several attempts that didn't work. So at some point, I also made some applications to go into industry, and those didn't work out. So I stayed in academia. And yeah, I have applied to other places, and those didn't come out. But so again, it's a bit of serendipity and a bit of working with what's available, or let's say doing the best that is possible within the, doing the best within the space of the possible. Because sometimes it's like, oh yeah, I would like to have this and that and that, but then that's not feasible for whatever reason. So for example, many people have asked me, why did I decide to go back to Mexico after my PhD? And it was not that I didn't want to go back to Mexico, but I was not like completely decided, yes, I want to go back to Mexico. I was like, okay, I might go back to Mexico, but I might stay abroad. And I was exploring both options, and simply the option in Mexico came first. And then I just followed that.
Sure. Can you talk more about how you maintain productivity with these different changes? So what changes or what stays the same, remains constant, both on the research or the personal side, whatever you feel comfortable?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess it's not something that I plan like, okay, I will keep this the same and I will change that. But once you move to a new place, then you kind of adapt, and then you develop a new schedule that works for that. So, for example, in my first in my first sabbatical at MIT, once I arrived at the office, and it was only me, another Mexican, and a Brazilian. And we were like, where's everybody? Supposedly we are the Latin guys who should arrive late. Where is everybody? But it was because only the three of us had kids in school age. So if you go and drop off your kids, it makes sense that then you go to the office. So that those constraints kind of shape your schedule a lot. And and if you don't have kids or they're already more or less independent, then people can do some personal activities in the morning, and then they will arrive at the office at 10-ish, 12-ish, and then they will go home later. And if you have to pick up your kids, then you finish at that time. And I mean, it's also like some people work better in the morning or in the night. So then, for example, at some point I would wake up like very early in the morning and do some personal, like the individual time, like meditating, or some people do work like they will wake up like at 5 a.m. and then they do like their personal work before their kids wake up, and then they go into the morning routine, because that's like the only time when they can have some quiet time. And of course, that means that you should go and sleep earlier, no? But some people, they have their productive time after their kids go to sleep. And yeah, so in many cases, just like exploring what fits, and you have constraints, and then you work around those constraints.